Okay, good afternoon, everyone in Ottawa. For those of you in the back, I will encourage you to come towards the front. We do have a live demo that we're going to be doing a little bit later, and it'll be easier for you to see if you come a little bit closer to the front. But for now, we're gonna jump right in, and I'm guessing some people will come in as lunch finishes up as well. So my name is Peter Neer. I am the National Director of Technology for VMware, and it gives us an interesting perspective because VMware is plugged into the majority of the Canadian economy. About 80% of Canada is running VMware for their workloads. And it gives us an interesting perspective because we're having conversations now as private sector and public sector organizations are looking to take advantage of the cloud. We're in all of those conversations. And so what we're going to do today is talk to you a little bit about cloud in Canada. We've talked a lot about cloud so far this morning. You heard from some of the AWS speakers, and you've heard from some other speakers. I want to bring that down to, okay, what's going on in Canada? So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to try to connect that to what you have in front of you as a task, right? We heard from some of your government leaders that we want to take advantage of cloud. We want to take advantage of the agility and the services that cloud can bring, and we want to do that quickly. So I'm going to try to show you how we're going to get there quickly. We are going to have a workload migration demo. You've probably heard a lot about workload migration today. In our keynotes, we heard about it. And we're actually going to show you a live workload migration. Live demos in a conference environment always go well, so it's going to be tons of fun for that. And then because I have been working with the Government of Canada for a while, we're going to finish with procurement vehicles, because almost every conversation I have with people at a conference like this is, that is fantastic. Am I allowed to buy it? Okay, so we're gonna finish with that to give you the ability to go out and potentially use some of these things in your environments. So let's talk about hybrid cloud. These are some global stats, and the data shows that across the world, organizations are committed to a hybrid architecture, and 92% of those consider it important to have the same infrastructure on-premise as you have in the cloud. So that's interesting numbers, and I would say I always want to compare these types of global numbers to Canada data as well, because Canada's a little bit further behind. Honestly, the big cloud providers only set up in Canada on Canadian soil about 2 years ago. Right? So Canada's catching up a little bit to some of these global numbers. But if I look at some global data, this is from a VMware partner named Scalar. They're out in the hall as well. The shift happened in Canada in about 2017. So in 2017, 2/3 of organizations that were polled said, yes, we are looking for a hybrid infrastructure. Again, that definition that says, I want to do the same thing on premise as I'm going to be doing in the cloud as well. I always challenge people with this, right? We, as Canadians, are early in our cloud journey, relatively speaking. And so when someone says cloud first, I want to ask why. Why are you interested in cloud? And here's some more Canadian data from one of our partners, SoftChoice. Top 3 results on the board. Number 1 is higher performance levels. Connect that to some of the conversations we had this morning around machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. Number 2, increased business agility. I want to deliver a citizen service. I want to deliver it now, and I want to use the most modern technologies to get that citizen service out the door. That's number 2, agility. And number 3 is cost savings. And again, we're early in this cycle, and I hear cost savings actually bubbling up to number 1, especially as we get to the implementer level. I want to go cloud first because it's cheaper than what we've been doing on premise. And so I'm going to dig into that a little bit as well. But first, let's talk about higher performance. All right, I'm going to talk about AI from a hockey example. Now, this is almost an easy question, but how many people are hockey fans watching the playoffs? Just quick hands up. Okay, that's an easy one in a Canadian audience. But if you are watching the playoffs, you will have seen that in the first round, a lot of teams that were expected to go on were knocked out. Specifically, Tampa, who has the most winning record in 100 years, was defeated by the Blue Jackets. And so what's interesting behind here is AI was a big part of that difference. Total upset, changed the game. Columbus took all of the game footage they had of Tampa Bay, brought that to an AI engine, a company called SportLogic, actually out of Montreal here, ran that all through the machine learning analysis to say, where is Tampa weak? The answer is forechecking. If you are aggressive forechecking, Tampa will give up the puck. And so, Columbus went into that series and had a ridiculous amount of forechecking that caused unheard amounts of turnovers, and they took that and won. Now, it's an example of taking some of the information you already have and bringing it closer to an artificial intelligence engine to make a difference. So let's think from a government perspective. I'm just assuming none of you own hockey teams here, but you do have government services that you're looking to deliver. What if you could do the same thing? What if you could take those applications and the data that you have today and rent some of the AI capability for just an hour or two? Tens of thousands of cores, crunch the numbers, come back and say, man, there is this critical piece of health information that I just discovered for Canadians. Or another example, Alex talked about the Open Government Conference. I signed up for that, and there was actually a security background check that happened when you signed up for the Open Government Conference. What if you could take that application, as I'm saying I want to come to the Open Government Conference, and do a real-time security check, reach out and have some machine learning against what are the triggers that might make me not want Pete to come to this conference, right? You could do those things if you have access to AI and machine learning. Let's switch over to cost savings, right? Number one thing I tell Canadian IT executives is cloud is not inherently cheaper, right? If you take what I call your mess for less and try to move that over to the cloud, you will find very quickly that that is not true, right? If you take something that is done inefficiently on premise and attach a meter to it, you will find out very quickly just how inefficient that is. However, there is an example that makes a lot of sense. And for this, I'll describe this to you. Again, another hockey reference. I'm actually not a hockey guy, but somehow I have all hockey references. This is the water usage in the city of Edmonton. Okay? The green line is the average water usage for a day in Edmonton. The blue line is the water usage during the 2010 gold medal hockey game in the Olympics. You can see not a lot of people were using water during the game. You can see that a lot of people were flushing toilets between periods. This is an example of elastic demand, right? If you are designing the water system for the city of Edmonton, you need to design it so that the pipes don't explode when you have a hockey game. So let's take that to an IT level, right? If you are a government agency today and you're designing an on-premise infrastructure to run your applications, you might say, here, I know what my average load is. I need to run X, and to run X, I need to buy $1 million worth of stuff, whether that be cooling, servers, storage, etc. I need about $1 million of stuff. But then you go from there to, I have peak load. So if everybody flushes their toilet or everybody submits their taxes on the same day, it doesn't fall over. So you're going to build in that peak load. Then you're going to build in a little bit of buffer as well, because you only get to do a budget request every year, and so you're going to build a little bit of buffer in there. You very quickly go from $1 million worth of stuff that you need to $2 million worth of stuff. But the other reality is you need to do a disaster recovery on that. So you need to replicate everything you've done. A good design looks like this, right? Your average is you need about $1 million, but that turns into about $4 million, and that just makes sense. People are doing this today. We are advising customers to do this today on premise. That, however, is very different in the cloud. Because in the cloud, things are elastic. And that means that, yes, I'm going to say my average load is X. And so in that average load, I'm going to buy some capacity from Amazon, and that capacity is what's going to run me day to day. But for those times when everybody flushes their toilet or when everybody submits their taxes, I'm just going to get capacity on demand, because the cloud really is a bunch of servers that are just sitting there waiting to be used. We're only going to bill you for them when you need them. So you can now start to build with that assumption in mind. I'm no longer going to replicate what I'm doing on premise. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to do just what I need and then rent more capacity as I go. And it gets even better when you look at disaster recovery, because I don't need to duplicate everything I'm doing. I just need enough that's going to keep that warm in the environment. And if there is a disaster, I'm going to rent that capacity on demand. Take me a week maybe to correct whatever happened on my main site, and then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to ramp down my demand. So this is a good example of where you can look at cost savings in the cloud. I'm not going to take everything I'm doing. I'm not going to take that $4 million worth of stuff and try to replicate it in the cloud. I'm going to think differently. I'm going to think, I'm only going to contract for what I think I need, and if I'm over or under that, we'll adjust. We'll take in that elastic capacity of the cloud. All right, so you've heard a lot from me. You've heard a lot from people before. Hopefully you have come to this conclusion. All right, why is important? I get it. Maybe I have some things in my organization that I want to do, but let's talk about how, because we haven't really gotten to the how, and if you're like many of the public service that I speak to, some of the things that we've talked about so far might seem like they're out there a little ways. So how do we get there today? Because the reality is, when you're trying to look at cloud first in Canada, you're doing it in an environment where you're trying to, change out the wings of the plane while it's already in the air. Canadian stat, 90% of applications running in Canadian data centers are traditional applications, right? They need network, they need storage, they need 3 tiers, they have databases, web servers, etc. 10% are on the cloud native side. Those 10% are relatively easy to move to the cloud. They're very easy to build net new in the cloud. But that other 90% isn't, right? It's off-the-shelf software. It's software that you inherited from the person who had the job before you that somebody wrote in a language that nobody knows anymore. That's the reality in Canada that we have to deal with. And coincidentally, when cloud launched in Canada, that was around 2016, AWS set up in Canada. That was also the same time when AWS partnered with VMware. Because if you are a cloud provider, do you want access to 10% of the market, or do you want access to 100% of the market? So interestingly for us, when cloud became available in Canada, cloud was now no longer just cloud native. Cloud was part of this partnership that includes traditional applications from VMware as well as the cloud native applications you're developing. So let's talk a little bit about those traditional applications. And I actually had this conversation over lunch with someone. Can't quite see him in the audience just because of the lights, but migrating those workloads can be difficult. So a traditional application has 3 things, probably a few more, but if I take it down to its basics, you've got storage, compute, and network that all interact with each other. And if I look at how those work, right in the middle you've got compute, which has the application logic. That's where the application actually lives. But then that application is also looking for application state down in the storage level. And the application is assuming that the storage is going to do what storage does, meaning it's going to take care of replication. It's going to take care of availability. It's going to take care of performance. That storage layer is not something that the application actively takes care of. It's expecting storage does that for you. Similarly on network, the application depends on the network layer to do things like load balancing and firewalling and make sure the traffic that's coming into the application is the traffic that's supposed to be coming into the application. A traditional application does not know how to handle things when it's outside of the norm. right? So that's a traditional application. These three elements work in conjunction with each other. If you are like most of Canada, you have probably virtualized the compute layer, right? And that virtualization allows for portability, right? So if I look at Government of Canada, average stats, 80% virtualized, 90% of that virtualization is on VMware. So I can comfortably say that within the Government of Canada, if you want to move an application within your data center, it's just a matter of clicking a button, right? I'm going to move it from that server to that server. Nobody knows any different. Your taxes still get filed. Everything's working just fine, right? That's what we're doing today. vMotion, one of the technologies that VMware pioneered years ago. So you might think, I've got this compute virtualized, I can just move it to the cloud, right? The challenge with traditional applications is that there's a dependency. And again, if you're like most Canadian organizations, you probably have a dependency of some sort of traditional storage on-premise and a dependency on some sort of traditional networking on-premise. And you can't tick that box and move it over to the cloud and say, there you go, now you're a cloud storage provider. There's work that needs to be done. And for that reason, cloud migrations typically have been challenging. The conversation I had at lunch was, look, we moved everything over, but none of the networking worked for us, right? Pretty common, especially given the complexity of some of the Government of Canada networks. It just doesn't work. And so you have to go back into that application and figure out, how am I going to rework the networking stack underneath here? How am I going to rewrite parts of the application that are depending on networking? And that's okay. There's some applications where that makes sense, right? If it's a critical application, you want to rewrite those things, you want to go native into some of the cloud environments, that's okay. The reality is, though, you've got thousands of applications, and you're not going to rewrite all those thousands of applications. What makes more sense is to do this. Same concept that we had when we took physical servers and made them virtual servers. We're going to take that virtual storage and everything about that storage that your application is expecting, we're going to make it virtual. Basically, fake it out. Same thing on the network. We're going to take everything that the application is expecting from the network. The application doesn't know any different. It still thinks it's talking to hardware, but we're virtualizing it. You take those three things together, it is very easy now to move to the cloud, because everything about your application and your applications, because this is generally a multi-application conversation, it's just ones and zeros. I can move ones and zeros around really easily. It's especially easy to move ones and zeros around when the platform is the same on both sides of that equation, right? So this is what we call the VMware Cloud. So VMware Cloud takes everything a traditional application needs to run, brings it into just ones and zeros, and makes it portable across your data center, across clouds, etc. So I'll give you a couple scenarios that are common with Canadian organizations today. Number one here, data center evacuation. This is one where I no longer have any interest in running a data center. I want to get out of that business. I want to just move it all to somewhere else, so VMware Cloud. Okay, we can take any version of vSphere, even if you're way out of date, which again, I've worked with the Government of Canada for a while. I know many of you are way out of date. But we can take that, and using this tool called HCX, Hybrid Connect, we can move that over to a VMware Cloud, right? That can be a VMware Cloud you run. It can be a VMware Cloud that SSC is running. It can be a VMware Cloud that AWS is running, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Second example, hybrid cloud. This is probably more common in Canada. Private sector has gone this way, and I've seen the model building up this way. Hybrid cloud says, I want to keep doing some things on premise, and I want to do some things in the cloud. Maybe on premise, I want my core applications, and in the cloud, I want DR. Kind of what I talked about earlier, right? Just a little bit of DR, and then I'll scale it up if I need it. So in that case, we can upgrade you from what you're doing today to essentially the VMware Cloud running on premise, and then use that tool that we know and love called vMotion to move across cloud to cloud, right? Move from your data center to an SSC data center, or in this particular case, I want to talk a little bit more detail around VMware Cloud and AWS, because it is the same thing, right? It's no longer a conversation about how do I take what I'm doing on VMware and convert it to run in AWS. Now it's a conversation of AWS is running the exact same stuff, the exact same platform. VMware Cloud on AWS. I'm going to take those ones and zeros and just move them over there, and it's going to keep running. Right? For those of you on networking, we've virtualized the network. Your IP addressing works. Your security profiles work. Your storage profiles work. It's ones and zeros. Just moves. Okay? So what is this VMware Cloud on AWS? It's a jointly engineered solution between VMware and AWS. And jointly engineered is important here because there are some unique capabilities of the cloud that AWS has built, and there are unique capabilities of VMware that we have built over the years. The magic of VMware Cloud and AWS is connecting those two things together, taking the best of both worlds and making them work. And we'll show you an example of that in a bit here. But it is a VMware service. So what that means is we take care of everything for you, right? It is VMware, you call. VMware, my infrastructure needs some help. We do it for you. Has the software-defined networking, the software-defined storage, software-defined compute, all running on the AWS infrastructure. So this is in the AWS data center in Montreal, which I'm guessing most of you would prefer to be in Montreal, or across the world, and I'll get to that as well. We take care of the things that tend to be a bit of a burden sometimes when you're running your own environment. We take care of deploying everything. We take care of configuring it. We take care of patch management. We take care of upgrades. You are always up to date with your infrastructure as a service when you're running with VMware Cloud and AWS. And you are always up to date across the globe. So the Montreal data center, probably the destination for most of you. But there are other data centers as well. If you are looking to have operations across the Atlantic or operations in the US, we are resident in every one of AWS's availability zones by the end of the year, essentially, is the timeline. The Montreal data center opened up about a month ago. And so this is a relatively new one for VMware, but we've been running these in the US and in Europe now for about 2 years. A little more detail. What is this, right? So on the left-hand side, you'll see this is your on-premise. If you choose to continue running on-premise, that's your VMware Cloud you're running on-premise. But in the middle is the VMware Cloud on AWS. And it is the exact same thing, the exact same software that you could be running on-premise. It's just running in the AWS availability zone. Here's what's really cool. If you go back to my AI example, how do I take those applications that I have and bring them closer to an AI engine? Well, if you're taking your information and your applications and putting it into AWS, it is literally on the same floor as all of these Amazon services as well. So now you have direct access to use something like an artificial intelligence capability to start to make some interesting decisions. You have direct access to new tools that you can use to build citizen service apps. Yes, I have this application and this data here that I really can't touch, but wouldn't it be cool if I could launch a new app using these new services from Amazon and have it out and running in the hands of my citizens in 2 months? Kind of cool. I would like that. I am a taxpayer. Please do that. And that's really what we're doing. Right? We're connecting this so that you have that elasticity. But I personally am most excited for Canadian organizations that they can now take advantage of some of these new things. I've called it a leapfrog capability, right? Yes, Canada's a little bit late to the game when it comes to cloud, but we're getting into cloud at a time when the tooling is much more significant. If you were a government organization in the US 5 years ago getting into cloud, you would be having budget and timing conversations about application migration. Essentially, I'm going to rewrite this thing. I'm going to spend 2 years and $5 million on my budget to rewrite this application. As Canadians, we now have the ability to say, I'm just going to take that application, and we're actually going to show you in the demo. You can move it over very quickly. and then start innovating on top of that right away. That gives us the opportunity as Canadians to leapfrog some of our international competition and start to do new things faster than they ever could have before. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about another jointly engineered capability. This is one called Elastic DRS. So remember, back to the toilet flushing example. Hopefully you stick in your mind and not just, wow, that guy's weird. But the toilet flushing example of making sure you've got that additional capacity available. How does that actually work? All right, so you've deployed everything in your VMware Cloud on AWS. You set thresholds that says, I want my CPU, memory, and storage to be at about this level here. And if it ever goes into the red, well, that's a problem. Today, what you would do is you would probably call somebody, say, my system isn't working, maybe procure some new hardware, get the procurement done in about a month, ideally, and then get it deployed, plug it in, get it working. That's today's example. If you're doing this in Amazon instead, hey, that just triggered something. We're going to reach out to the AWS Fleet Management Service, this is one of the things that they've developed, and plug in a new server in about 5 minutes, and then we're going to vMotion the workloads off of the existing environment and into that new server. Minutes, okay? You get it back to your target threshold. Okay, I don't need this thing anymore. I don't really want to pay for it anymore. We'll vMotion that workload back into your core environment, and we'll get rid of that server and we'll stop billing you for it, right? I was in Ottawa 2 weeks ago meeting with a customer, and I described this to them, and I got this quote. I'm not going to attribute the quote, but I will say it was, well, that's pretty much nirvana, isn't it, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we wish we could do, and it's just a core capability of something you can have access to today. All right, so with that, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague, Chris Saunders. Chris is going to come up and actually walk you through a live demo of migrating one of those workloads from a data center that we own to one of the VMware Cloud on AWS data centers. So Chris, come on up, introduce yourself, and show the demo. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. All right, as soon as we get up running here, my goal today is to show you how easy it is to migrate a virtual machine from your on-prem environment into VMC on AWS. And if anybody from the D&D crowd wants to help me with my password, that's okay too. Okay. Awesome. So this is a live environment. I've got a vSphere cluster that's existing inside of an Austin data center, and I've got a VMC and AWS software-defined data center deployed into the US East 1 region. I'm actually going to SSH into my application server. I'm going to run a container that runs an application that I built. It's a little Python app that talks to Twitter, pulls out tweets live in real time. I thought that would be a little bit more impactful than kind of your standard ping test. So let me connect to my application server. Okay. So I'm going to start the application, and then I'm going to start the migration, and then we're going to start going through what that migration actually means. And in about 3 minutes, we'll have the VM actually migrated. So I'm going to jump into HCX. You heard Peter talk about that a little bit, about how Hybrid Cloud Extension actually allows you to do these migrations. We're going to talk about that in more detail in a second. Jump into the migration pane here. I'm going to find my virtual machine that is running the application. And it is cleverly named Migrate Saunders 1. So there's my virtual machine. I've selected it, and now I got to figure out where I'm actually going to put it. You can see that this SDDC data center, that's actually my software-defined data center that's running inside VMC and AWS. This is a heavily used environment for demos like this one. So we have lots of folders. We also have resource pools. et cetera, to make sure that we don't clobber each other. I should also mention that I'm actually running this on a VDI session that's inside of the same SDDC that I'm doing this demo, or that my application server is running in. So I'm going to pick the data store to put it on. And in this case, I'm going to do a vMotion, and I'm going to explain the other migration capabilities afterwards. But I want to get this vMotion started. This is the vMotion you know and love. And it comes with kind of the same prerequisites that you have for vMotion inside of your data center in terms of bandwidth and throughput and latency. In this environment, I actually have AWS Direct Connect running, so I have a high-speed, low-latency access into the AWS infrastructure from my private private data center. So I've got a hybrid cloud extension deployed here, and what HCX does is deploy some some virtual appliances into both sides of the equation. It allows me to stretch my networks across. It does some WAN optimization and gives me this neat little UI to actually see my environment. And as I mentioned, I've got my private data center inside in Austin, Texas, and then I have a VMC and AWS environment deployed inside US East 1. Now, if you watch while I was going through that migration process, you might have noticed there's a couple of other migration options listed here that I thought I would tell you about. A vMotion is a vMotion, as I mentioned, but HCX gives me a couple of different capabilities as well. So I can do cloud motion with vSphere replication, or I can do bulk migration. Think of these both as vSphere replication assisted migrations. So I use replication algorithms to make sure that the VMs get replicated to the other side, my target site that I want to migrate to, and then I'll do the vMotion. The cloud motion with vSphere replication is actually an instant migration, meaning once the replication is finished, I'm going to do the migration directly afterwards. Bulk migration is a little bit more interesting, especially for customers of size. You probably have hundreds and or thousands of VMs that you want to migrate. Bulk migration allows you to say, here are the VMs I want to migrate. I'm going to select those, and I want to migrate them in bulk. I'll start the vSphere replication cycle, and then I define a failover window that says, here's when I actually want that vMotion to occur. Generally speaking, for your production applications, you don't want to do the vMotion in the middle of the day or in the middle of your business hours, so you choose instead the hour that you actually want the migration to happen. So let's check on my migration, and if all has gone well, we're almost there. It's going a little bit slower today. So in the console here, I sort of covered it up a little bit. I should mention this is live Twitter. So, you know, hopefully I'm not having a conversation about my career at VMware with Peter after this. But Twitter is going in the background, an SSH connection to that application server. And you'll see once the migration completes that there's been no interruption to either my SSH connection or the application itself. So we're at 98%. So what's happened here is a standard vMotion across all the way from Austin, Texas into the North Virginia data center or the US East 1 availability zone. And my VM is soon to be running inside this environment. So we started the migration at 2:01. So that's about 3 minutes or so, and the migration is complete. Or at least it will be by the time Peter kicks me off the stage. So that's how simple it is to run a migration. Again, no impact to your VM. You don't necessarily need to even change IP addresses. You can migrate very simply from your current infrastructure into the cloud with VMC on AWS and HCX. And you can see my application or my VM has actually migrated. It's made the journey. There's been no impact to my SSH session or the application running at all. Okay, so Peter, we can bring you back up.
All right. Hi. I'm going to ask for a round of applause for Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, so let me just summarize what you saw. You saw an application, a simple application, yes, but an application running in one of our data centers live, the super critical, mission critical application of a Twitter wall, and coming across to VMware Cloud and AWS with no downtime whatsoever, right? If I take that to the extreme of you having a mission critical application and I'll pick on CRA. If you have your tax filing systems that you want to be able to move to the cloud so that you can burst up and take advantage of some of that capacity, you could do that, right, in real time. So I wanted to show you that live to try to change the way you're thinking about some of the cloud migrations. Right? There are consulting firms who have their entire reason for existence based on rewriting applications for the cloud. And in some cases that makes sense. And if you go to somebody and have a conversation that says, hey, I want to move this workload from here to here, often that will be the answer. I want to rewrite this thing for you. You in this room, the majority of you Government of Canada, and I would say that the other government agencies in the room are running VMware today, very likely. You have an easy button that will let you take what you're doing in your on-premise data centers today and move it to the cloud. Going back to where we started, why would you do that? Okay, cost and scalability might be one, but that'll just help you get your budget approved, hopefully. The real thing that we're looking for here is agility and bringing those new citizen services to us as taxpayers, using the systems you already have and using some of the new capabilities that you get from Amazon Web Services. All right, I promised I would finish on procurement. And procurement is always a challenge, I know, as we're figuring these things out. So there's two vehicles we want to talk through. For federal government, there is a cloud contract for AWS services. I'm not going to read out the number of the contract on here. We're adding this particular service on, and it's just waiting for a couple other clicks as it goes through the system, but that will be the vehicle that you work with there. For the broader public sector, similar vehicle as well. Again, you have the cloud technology contract vehicle here as well, again, going through some of the final clicks on it. We're working with several partners on this, but the premier partner that we're working with and is here with us today in the booth is Teramac. And Teramac has the certifications required to make you successful. They have the contracting vehicles in place for you to be able to procure some of these things. And another interesting thing that Teramac has done as part of this contract is they've built in some additional enablement services. So in here, there's some other things you can bring in and ask Teramac to do for you, like a technology workshop. How am I going to do this? What makes sense? What applications should I be targeting? There's an enablement service around this. So how do I get my people up and running and thinking cloud first? Multi-cloud security and protection blueprint. Think protected B, and how do I get that stamp for this particular application? You heard this morning the AWS data center is protected B certified for particular applications. You might have some additional security you want to go through. Teramac has an additional service available for you on the contract as well. And then the last one here is a workload migration tiger team to help you figure out what are you going to do. One of the first things you might look at in your applications is how do these things talk to each other, right? It's not always going to be a Twitter wall application you can just easily port over. So we actually have capabilities that Teramac can leverage to look at the traffic and how does this application talk to this application, talk to this application, and maybe it makes sense rather than moving just one, I'm going to take this bundle and move those together as well. So that's one of the services that Teramac can provide to you. I'll end on this. I'll reiterate what I said earlier. Remember why you're trying to do this. I know when you have a day-to-day that says cloud first, thou shalt do cloud, 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 it's easy to just say, okay, I'm trying to get it done so I can get the checkbox. But think about why you're doing it. Get me those additional citizen services, make smart decisions on how I'm going to scale, make smart decisions on how I'm going to have an impact on my budget and have an impact on the overall technology that we use. And then when you decide you're going to make that migration, think of some of the newer capabilities that we have access to as well and leverage those. Use the opportunity, the unique opportunity we have as Canadians to leapfrog. Don't do the same thing everybody did 5 years ago. Do something different. Take advantage of these technologies and be a leader amongst your peers in the world. With that, I'll say thank you and turn it back over to the MC. Thanks, everyone.